Emma's black eyes glinted like polished onyx under the pale blue light of the moon. She crouched on the ledge outside the towering marble spires of the royal palace, her nimble fingers deftly placing a small, circular device against the window. The faint hum of Zarathi technology thrummed beneath her touch, its advanced system slicing through human defenses like silk. Her mission was clear: infiltrate, observe, and extract Prince Oscar's most coveted secrets. The fate of her people depended on it. But as Emma slipped through the shimmering energy field that protected the prince's chambers, a chill crept down her spine. The room was still too still. Her bare feet whispered against the intricately woven rug as her eyes scanned the space. A perfect blend of luxury and practicality. It was a room befitting a warrior prince. Silver trim gleamed along weapon displays, contrasting with the soft amber glow of bookshelves that housed volumes of philosophy, history, and engineering. She was alone, or so she thought. "Interesting technique," came a voice behind her, deep and velvet smooth. "But flawed." Emma froze. Her instinct screamed to reach for the blade concealed beneath her belt, but she restrained herself, spinning around with calculated ease. There he stood, silhouetted against the soft light of the moon. Prince Oscar was tall and broad-shouldered, his presence as commanding as the legends whispered about him across galaxies. Short, tousled hair framed a face that was equal parts rugged and regal, his piercing blue eyes locking onto her with unnerving precision. "Not often I find uninvited guests," he continued, his voice low and measured, "let alone ones who look like you." Emma allowed a slow smirk to cross her lips, masking the ripple of unease that threatened her composure. "Maybe I'm not a guest," she said smoothly, her voice dripping with confidence. "Maybe I'm the entertainment." Oscar chuckled, a sound that sent a strange thrill through her. "You're bold, I'll give you that. But who are you really? And why are you in my chambers?" "I'm whoever you want me to be," Emma replied, stepping forward deliberately. The movement was subtle but powerful, her blue skin catching the light as if to highlight every graceful curve of her form. She had used this tactic countless times before distracting her targets with allure, while her mind worked to uncover their weaknesses. But Oscar wasn't distracted. His eyes remained locked on hers, unyielding and sharp. "A liar, then," he said. "Good. At least we're starting from a place of honesty." Emma faltered, momentarily caught off guard by his paradoxical statement. Was he toying with her? Testing her? She forced her composure back into place. "Perhaps I'm here because your reputation intrigued me." Oscar stepped closer, and the air between them seemed to thrum with tension. "And what part of my reputation is that? The part where I'm a visionary, or the part where I don't tolerate spies?" Her breath caught in her throat, but she recovered quickly. "Visionary," she said, her voice softening to a purr. "I've heard the stories. The prince who dreams of uniting the galaxy. A utopia where war is obsolete. It's admirable, really." His smirk returned, but this time it was laced with something darker, something primal. "Admirable, but not enough to keep you from sneaking into my chambers." Emma hesitated, her mind racing. She could hear the faint hum of the Zarathi device still scanning the room, collecting data on the mysterious power source that had put Oscar's kingdom at the forefront of technological innovation. She needed time. Oscar tilted his head, his blue eyes narrowing. "You're stalling," he said softly. "What is it you're after? Weapons? Information? Or is this some elaborate assassination attempt?" Her pulse quickened, but she stood her ground, meeting his gaze with equal intensity. "What if I told you I'm here for something more important than all of that?" Oscar's brow furrowed, but his curiosity was piqued. "And what would that be?" "Freedom," she said, the lie rolling off her tongue like honey. "My people live in chains. They say you're a man who believes in liberation. I came to see if the stories are true." His expression shifted, the steel in his eyes softening just enough to make her wonder if she had struck a nerve. "Freedom," he repeated, his voice low. "A dangerous word. Only to those who fear it," she countered, stepping closer. She was close enough now to feel the heat radiating off him, the raw energy of a man who could command armies and inspire hope with the same breath. Oscar studied her for a long moment, and for the first time, Emma felt a flicker of uncertainty. He was reading her, peeling back the layers of her deception with a skill that was both infuriating and intoxicating. Finally, he spoke. "You're not from this world," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "And yet you speak of freedom as if it's personal." Emma's heart thudded in her chest. He was too perceptive, too sharp. She needed to divert his attention, and fast. But before she could respond, he reached out, his fingers brushing against her arm. The contact was electric, a jolt that sent shockwaves through her entire being. "Whatever you're here for," Oscar murmured, his gaze boring into hers. "You're not leaving empty-handed. But be warned, what you take from me, I'll take back, and more." The challenge in his voice sent a shiver down her spine, but she refused to back down. "Then I guess we'll see who comes out on top." Oscar's lips curved into a dangerous smile, and Emma felt the balance of power shift between them. For the first time in her life, she wasn't sure if she was the predator or the prey. And as the prince stepped even closer, his presence overwhelming, she realized something else. Her mission was no longer as clear as it had once seemed. The moonlight cast a silver glow across the room, illuminating the fine lines of Prince Oscar's face and the unwavering storm in his eyes. He had closed the distance between them now, his towering frame so close that Emma could feel the faint brush of his breath against her cheek. Her carefully built walls were crumbling, piece by piece, under the weight of his gaze. "I don't know if you're here to save your people or destroy mine," Oscar murmured, his voice low and edged with both suspicion and intrigue. "But you've ignited something dangerous." Emma tilted her head, her lips curving into a sly smile, though her pulse betrayed her. "Dangerous can be exciting," she whispered, her voice barely audible. A pause hung between them, thick and heavy, as if the room itself had stopped to watch. Then, as if moved by some unseen force, Oscar reached out and cupped her chin with a hand that was both firm and gentle. His touch burned against her cool blue skin, and for a moment, Emma forgot every lie, every mission, every loyalty that wasn't tethered to this moment. "You're not like anyone I've ever met," he said, his thumb brushing against her cheek. There was a raw honesty in his voice that caught her off guard. "You're fire, and I've been cold for too long." Before she could respond, he leaned in, his lips capturing hers in a kiss that was as much a battle as it was a surrender. Emma had kissed men before, many, in fact, but this was different. This wasn't about power or manipulation. This was a clash of wills, a meeting of equals, and it left her breathless. Her hands found his chest, the hard planes of muscle beneath his shirt, reminding her of his strength, his unyielding presence. But instead of pushing him away, she pulled him closer, her body reacting to his as if drawn by gravity. The tension that had simmered between them since their first meeting now exploded into something primal, something undeniable. Oscar's hands moved to her waist, pulling her against him as the kiss deepened. His lips were warm, his movements confident yet reverent, as if he were discovering her for the first time and never wanted to stop. Emma's mind raced, caught between her duty and the overwhelming desire that surged through her like a tidal wave. "I should stop," she breathed, breaking the kiss, but not moving away. Her forehead rested against his, their breaths mingling in the small space between them. "But you won't," Oscar replied, his voice hoarse with want. His hands tightened on her waist, anchoring her to him. "Because neither will I." He kissed her again, and this time there was no hesitation, no pretense. The kiss was wild, consuming, filled with a hunger that left no room for doubt. Emma let herself melt into him, her body pressed against his, as if they could somehow become one. Oscar's fingers traced the curve of her spine, his touch sending shivers cascading through her. She let out a soft gasp, her lips parting against his as heat bloomed in her core. She had never felt this before, this raw, unfiltered connection that seemed to bypass reason and go straight to her soul. They stumbled back toward the bed, the motion unsteady, yet urgent. Oscar's hands were everywhere, exploring her with a reverence that made her heart race. He treated her not like an enemy or even an ally, but like something precious, something worth cherishing. And for the first time, Emma let herself believe it. As they fell onto the bed, the world around them seemed to fade away. There was no mission, no betrayal, no war, only them. Oscar's lips traveled along her jawline, down the column of her neck, each kiss leaving a trail of fire in its wake. Emma arched into him, her hands threading through his hair as she surrendered to the moment. "You're incredible," he murmured against her skin, his voice filled with awe. "Everything about you." Emma's heart clenched at the sincerity in his tone. She wasn't used to being seen not like this. For so long she had been a weapon, a tool for her people's survival. But Oscar didn't see her as a weapon. He saw her as a woman, and it terrified her. "You don't know me," she whispered, her voice trembling with a vulnerability she hadn't meant to reveal. Oscar paused, his blue eyes meeting hers. Then let me. His words broke something inside her, and before she could think, she pulled him down to her lips crashing against his in a kiss that spoke of everything she couldn't say. Their passion burned brighter, the fire between them consuming and relentless. And for the first time, Emma didn't care about the consequences. The first slivers of morning light crept through the ornate windows, casting a warm golden hue over the royal chamber. Emma lay still, her head resting against the expanse of Prince Oscar's chest, as his breathing rose and fell in a steady rhythm. For a moment, the quiet seemed unreal, like a stolen dream she would be dragged out of at any second. She hadn't meant for any of this to happen. Her mission had been clear: infiltrate, manipulate, and extract. Yet here she was, lying in the arms of the man who was meant to be her target. Her fingers grazed the edge of the sheets absently, her mind replaying everything that had transpired between them. The fire, the pull, the way he had touched her, not like a prince indulging a fleeting desire, but like a man finding something he hadn't even realized he was searching for. She glanced up. Oscar's eyes were still closed, his face peaceful for the first time since she'd met him. In sleep, he looked younger, less burdened by the weight of his visions, his leadership, and the expectations of an entire kingdom. She allowed herself to admire him, his chiseled jaw, the faint stubble, the strength in his form even at rest. What am I doing? The question snapped through her mind like a whip. This wasn't a fairy tale. This was war cold, merciless, and unrelenting. She was Zarathi, trained to infiltrate, to seduce, to gain secrets at any cost. And here she was, tangled up in silk sheets, lost in a dangerous man's arms. A faint hum caught her attention, the device she had planted the night before. Its work was nearly done. The scan of the prince's chamber would reveal the location of his kingdom's most guarded secret, the power source behind their unmatched technology. Once she delivered the data to her people, they could replicate the technology and rise above the humans. Her heart twisted as she sat up, pulling the sheets around her shoulders. Deliver the secrets. Leave. That's the mission. That's the plan. So why did it feel like betrayal? Oscar stirred behind her, his voice rough with sleep as he spoke. Running already? Emma froze for half a beat before turning, composing herself with a cool smile. I don't run, she said softly. I'm just thinking. Oscar pushed himself up on one elbow, his blue eyes sharp and clear despite the morning haze. His gaze found her immediately, piercing through her facade as if he could see every thought she dared not voice. About what? He asked. She hesitated. Lying now would only deepen the chasm. About what happens next. Oscar watched her for a long moment, his gaze unrelenting. You're not like anyone I've ever met, Emma. His voice softened, but there was still an edge of steel beneath it. You keep pretending you don't care. You act like this like we don't matter. But it does, doesn't it? Emma's throat tightened. She wanted to deny it. She wanted to laugh it off and call him a fool, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she looked away, her gaze falling on the ornate crest of his kingdom, carved into the far wall, a symbol of power, vision, and trust. Why do you care, Oscar? She whispered. You don't know who I really am. Oscar pushed himself fully upright, his movements slow but deliberate. Maybe not yet, he admitted, but I know enough. You're fire, and fire doesn't burn without reason. She turned to him sharply, black eyes meeting his blue. And what if I'm the storm that will burn down everything you've built? Oscar didn't flinch. Instead, he reached for her hand, his fingers brushing against hers with deliberate care. Then, I'll take the risk. Emma's pulse quickened. How could he say it so easily? How could he trust so willingly when he didn't even know the full truth? You're a fool, she murmured, though her voice lacked its usual bite. Maybe, he replied, his lips quirking into a soft smile. But I'd rather be a fool for believing in something than a coward for believing in nothing. Emma pulled her hand away, standing abruptly. The air between them crackled with tension, but she couldn't stay close to him, not right now. The device's faint hum reminded her of what needed to be done. I need air, she said, already moving toward the terrace that overlooked the sprawling kingdom below. The scene that met her eyes stole her breath away. The sun had risen fully now, casting light over Oscar's utopia, a kingdom unlike any she'd seen before. The city stretched out in radiant harmony, its structures built seamlessly into the natural world. Gardens flourished, rivers sparkled, and the skies buzzed with airships that floated like silent guardians. There was no pollution, no visible scars of war, only peace and order, the very ideals her people had mocked as human naivety. "You built this," she said quietly as Oscar joined her on the terrace. "I am building it," he corrected, his voice calm but firm. "It's not finished yet." Emma turned to him, searching his face. "Why?" she asked, the question slipping out before she could stop it. Oscar's gaze darkened. "Because the galaxy is broken. We fight, we conquer, we destroy, but no one wins. My kingdom is proof that we can be better." He looked at her, his expression softening. "Even you, Emma, even your people." Emma swallowed hard. She wanted to argue, to remind him that peace was an illusion, that power was survival. But staring out at the breathtaking view before her, she couldn't bring herself to say it. The hum of her device faltered, signaling its completion. The data was ready. Her mission was done. And yet, as she looked at Oscar, this stubborn, impossible man who dreamed of a world she didn't believe could exist, her resolve began to unravel. "Emma?" he said, stepping closer, his voice low and gentle. "Stay. Build it with me." Her breath hitched. "You don't know what you're asking." "Yes, I do," Oscar replied. "I'm asking you to choose. Stay with me, or leave and burn it all down." Emma turned away, her hands gripping the terrace railing as her mind raced. She could leave right now. She could deliver the secrets, and her people would rise as they deserved. She owed them that much. But when she looked at Oscar again, she saw something she'd never seen before. Hope. Could she really destroy that? The weight of the silence hung between them like a drawn blade. Emma's heart raced, her fingers clutching the railing as if it could hold her together. Behind her, Oscar stood still, his towering frame casting a shadow that seemed to stretch over her entire world. She had always been in control of men, of situations, of outcomes, but not this time, not with him. "You haven't answered me, Emma." His voice, low and commanding, shattered the quiet. "Are you staying? Or are you leaving to destroy everything I've built?" She turned slowly, her dark eyes narrowing as they met his storm-blue gaze. The softness from earlier was gone. The man who stood before her now wasn't just a dreamer, he was a warrior, unyielding, fearless. "And what will you do if I'm here to burn it all down?" she challenged, testing him, desperate to push him away before he shattered her completely. Oscar took a step closer, his eyes flashing like lightning. "Then I'll stop you." The words struck her harder than she expected, their finality carving through her chest. She had underestimated him again. Oscar wasn't the naive idealist she had painted him to be. He was steel wrapped in velvet, a man who could smile one moment and fight with the fury of 1,000 soldiers the next. "You'd kill me?" she said, though her tone was more defiant than she felt. He stopped just short of her, his jaw tight, his blue eyes locked on hers. "Don't test me, Emma. You're not the only one playing a dangerous game." For the first time in years, fear curled in her chest, not for herself, but for what might happen next. Oscar's presence was as commanding as ever, but there was no gentleness in his stance now, no hesitation. He was a man cornered, and cornered men were the most dangerous of all. "And if I told you I am a spy?" she said sharply, the words spilling out as if daring him to strike. "If I told you I came here to steal from you, to tear this kingdom apart for my people, what would you do then?" Oscar's gaze hardened, but he didn't flinch. "I'd ask you if it was worth it." The question caught her off guard. "What? Was it worth it?" he repeated, stepping closer. "The lies, the betrayal. Was it worth giving up what we could have built together?" Emma's pulse thundered in her ears. The intensity in his voice was cutting, the pain behind it unmistakable. She wanted to say no. She wanted to scream that she had no choice, that she was loyal to her people, that everything she'd done had been for survival. But she couldn't, not under the weight of his gaze. "You wouldn't understand," she said, her voice quieter now, as if admitting defeat. Oscar's expression darkened, his shoulders stiff. "Try me. Your kingdom, this utopia you dream of, means nothing to my people," she snapped, though even she heard the hesitation in her voice. "They see power as survival. Anything else is a fairy tale. Then they're wrong." Oscar's words struck like a whip, sharp and unrelenting. "And so are you." Emma's eyes narrowed, her pride flaring like a blade. "You think I want this? To tear down something beautiful just because I was ordered to? I didn't choose this, Oscar. Didn't you?" His voice dropped dangerously low, the tension between them crackling like fire in dry air. "Every step you've taken has been a choice, Emma. You chose to infiltrate my kingdom. You chose to lie to my face. You chose to stand here, looking me in the eyes, and deny what's happening between us." She faltered, the truth of his words hitting her harder than any blow. Oscar stepped closer again, his presence suffocating and inescapable. "I don't care who you think you are," he said, his voice a low growl. "I've faced assassins, spies, and traitors before. But you—" He grabbed her wrist, his grip firm yet careful, pulling her closer until there was barely a breath between them. "You're different." Emma's chest rose and fell sharply, her mind racing as his words settled deep within her. His hand on her wrist felt like iron, but his touch wasn't cruel. It was claiming, demanding. "What do you want from me?" she whispered, the fight bleeding out of her voice. "I want the truth," Oscar said, his blue eyes boring into hers. "What are you really here for?" Emma's throat tightened. For so long, the answer had been simple: complete the mission, deliver the secrets, save her people. But now, with Oscar standing before her, his resolve unshakable, that answer felt like a lie. "I don't know anymore," she admitted, her voice breaking just enough for him to hear it. Oscar's grip loosened slightly, though his gaze remained locked on hers. "Then decide, Emma," he said firmly, "because this, whatever it is between us, will destroy us both if we let it." A tremor ran through her. She wanted to deny him, to turn away and walk out of his life forever. But the way he looked at her like she wasn't a monster, like she wasn't just another pawn on a galactic chessboard, shook her to her core. "Why do you care so much?" she asked, desperate to understand him. "I could ruin everything." Oscar released her wrist, but didn't step back. Instead, he cupped her face in his hands, his touch impossibly gentle for a man who could crush armies. "Because I see you, Emma," he murmured. "Not the spy, not the weapon. I see the woman beneath it all, and I think you see me too." Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, and she hated herself for it. She had been taught to be strong, to be ruthless, to let no one close enough to break her. And yet here he was, dismantling every wall she had ever built, with nothing but words. "You're making a mistake," she whispered. "Maybe," he said, his voice softer now, "but it's mine to make." For a moment, neither of them moved. The world outside the terrace seemed to fade, leaving only the two of them suspended on the edge of something dangerous. Oscar's thumb brushed her cheek, the touch igniting a fire she didn't know how to extinguish. "I need time," she said finally, her voice shaky. Oscar's expression remained hard, but he nodded once. "Then take it. But don't take too long. The world won't wait." He turned and walked away, leaving Emma alone on the terrace, her heart pounding and her thoughts spiraling. She had come here to destroy him. Now, she wasn't sure if she could. Emma's decision had been made the moment she activated the data transmitter hidden in the silver clasp of her belt. The Zarathi scanner had worked seamlessly, extracting Oscar's secrets and sending them hurtling into the void of space, where her people waited. She stood in front of the tall mirror in her guest chambers, her black eyes staring back at her cold, calculated alien. This was the Emma her people had trained, the spy who could charm and deceive even the strongest of men. The Emma who didn't hesitate to lie. And yet, her chest felt tight. She couldn't shake the memory of Oscar's voice, his words still ringing in her mind. "I see the woman beneath it all." She had promised herself that she wouldn't care, that he was just another obstacle to overcome. But as she smoothed her black hair and adjusted the soft silk dress she'd been given, she felt an unfamiliar pang in her heart. "What are you doing?" she hissed to her reflection. "You've won. This is what victory feels like." But the hollow ache in her chest said otherwise. The doors to her chamber swung open without warning, startling her. Emma spun, her composure snapping back into place. Prince Oscar stood in the doorway, his piercing blue gaze colder than she'd ever seen it. Her breath caught. Something was wrong. "You're late for breakfast," Oscar said, his voice low and steady, too steady. Emma blinked. "You came to summon me for breakfast yourself?" "I'm honored, Your Highness." She forced a smile, her tone teasing, hoping to diffuse whatever tension lingered between them. But Oscar didn't smile. Instead, he stepped inside, the doors slamming shut behind him with an ominous thud. The sound echoed in the room, setting her nerves on edge. "I was hoping," he said slowly, his blue eyes never leaving hers, "that I wouldn't have to come here at all." Emma frowned. "What are you talking about?" Oscar stepped closer, his presence suffocating as the air seemed to thicken around them. "Don't lie to me, Emma, not anymore." Her heart skipped a beat. "I don't know what you're talking about." Oscar tilted his head, his jaw tight, his expression hard as stone. "Do you think I don't know what you did?" he growled, his voice low and dangerous. Do you think I'm a fool? The bottom dropped out of Emma's stomach. He knows. She swallowed hard, forcing herself to stand her ground. Oscar, you're being paranoid. Enough, he barked, his voice cutting through the room like a blade. Emma flinched, despite herself. She'd never seen him like this, so commanding, so utterly unyielding. Her facade faltered as Oscar stepped close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from him. I trusted you, he said, his voice quieter now but no less dangerous. I let you into my world. I let you into me. And this is how you repay me? I didn't. Don't lie to me, Emma, he snapped, his eyes blazing. You sent my secrets to your people. I know. I watched you. Her heart stopped. Watched me. Oscar continued, his voice tight with fury. Did you think I wouldn't have eyes on you? Did you think I wouldn't notice the Zarathi scanner when it activated? Emma's lips parted, but no words came. Her mind raced for a way out, a lie, an excuse, but there was nothing. She had been caught. Oscar's gaze bore into her, his expression equal parts anger and disappointment. I let myself believe you were different, he said bitterly, but I was wrong. You're just another spy, another weapon sent to destroy everything I've built. Emma took a shaky step back, guilt and shame twisting in her chest like a knife. Oscar, listen to me. It's not that simple. It is that simple, he snapped, advancing on her. You betrayed me. The weight of his words crushed her, but she didn't have the luxury of weakness. She straightened, meeting his gaze with defiance even as her heart screamed in protest. You're right, she said coldly. I did what I had to do for my people, and I'd do it again. Oscar's jaw tightened, his entire body coiled like a predator about to strike. And what about us? He demanded. Was that a lie too? Was every kiss, every touch, just another move in your game? Emma's throat tightened. It doesn't matter. It matters to me. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The tension between them was a physical force, pulling them toward the edge of something dangerous. Then, suddenly, Oscar reached out and grabbed her wrist, his grip firm, but controlled. You're not walking away from this, he said, his voice low and deadly. You don't get to play me for a fool and leave unscathed. Emma's breath caught. Let me go. No, Oscar said, pulling her closer. His blue eyes burned with a fire she hadn't seen before, a fire that both frightened and excited her. You want to act like a spy? Then I'll treat you like one. Is this your idea of punishment? She hissed, refusing to back down even as her heart thundered in her chest. Oscar leaned in, his voice a low growl. No, this is my idea of control. You're not leaving this kingdom until I decide what to do with you. And until then, Emma, you'll answer to me. Emma opened her mouth to protest, but before she could speak, Oscar turned and strode toward the door. Stay here, he ordered, his voice sharp. You'll regret it if you don't. And then he was gone, leaving Emma standing in the middle of the room, her chest heaving and her mind spinning. The fire between them had turned to a storm, a force neither of them could contain. Emma knew she should run, that she should find a way to escape, before Oscar tightened his hold on her any further. But as her trembling fingers grazed the wrist he had held, a dangerous truth settled deep in her chest. She didn't want to run. The palace halls stretched endlessly in Emma's fevered mind. Her vision blurred, the elegant walls and towering spires melting into shadows that twisted and turned. A cold sweat clung to her blue skin as her legs wavered beneath her. She stumbled against a marble column, gasping for breath, her pulse a frantic drumbeat in her ears. Something was wrong, very wrong. Her hands trembled as she pressed them against her temples, trying to steady herself, but it was no use. The fever gripped her like an iron fist, draining her strength with each passing second. Zarathi bodies weren't made for Earth's subtleties, its air, its food, its very atmosphere. What had been tolerable before had turned against her, and now her own body felt like the enemy. She didn't hear him approach, but suddenly he was there, Oscar. His voice was a distant, commanding sound at first, cutting through her haze like a beacon. Emma! Her knees buckled, and the world tilted. Before she hit the cold marble floor, Oscar's arms were around her, strong and unyielding. She blinked up at him, trying to focus on his face, the sharp lines of his jaw, the piercing blue eyes now filled with concern. Emma, he said again, softer this time, as he lifted her effortlessly into his arms. What's happening to you? She wanted to answer, but the fever pulled her under, plunging her into darkness. Hours later, Emma woke to the faint smell of earth and spice. The soft weight of silk sheets surrounded her, cool against her fevered skin. Her eyelids fluttered open, and she realized she was back in her chambers, though the light in the room was dimmed. She turned her head and froze. Oscar sat beside her bed, his large frame perched on a gilded chair, his forearms resting on his knees. He looked like a man who hadn't moved in hours, his expression hard to read, though his blue eyes betrayed his worry. In his hand was a small vial of glowing liquid, a Zarathi serum. "You're awake." Emma swallowed against the dryness in her throat, her voice a rasp. "How did you—" Oscar held up the vial. "I had my men retrieve this. I recognized the symptoms you were dying." His tone was sharp, but there was a rawness beneath it that made her chest ache. "What's this medicine called?" Her gaze shifted to the vial. "Viralix. Viralix," he repeated, rolling the word off his tongue like a foreign weapon. He uncorked the vial and leaned closer, his free hand cupping the back of her head. "Drink." Emma hesitated, staring up at him. Why was he doing this? After everything she had done after the betrayal, the lies, why save her? "Emma," he said, his voice low but firm, leaving no room for argument. "Drink it. I didn't fight to keep you alive just to lose you now." Her lips parted, and she let him tilt the vial to her mouth. The serum was cool, sharp, sliding down her throat and spreading warmth through her body. Within moments, the fever lifted. The pain subsided. Her strength began to return, and with it came something far heavier. Guilt. Oscar set the empty vial aside and looked at her, his expression unreadable. "You're lucky," he said finally. "The fever was close to killing you." Emma sat up slowly, her fingers curling into the sheets. "Why?" Oscar frowned. "Why what? Why save me?" Her voice cracked, but she couldn't stop. "You know what I did. You know. Why didn't you let me die?" Oscar stood abruptly, turning away from her. His broad shoulders were tense, his fists curling at his sides. For a long moment, he didn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, but filled with unshakable conviction. "Because I'm not like you, Emma." He turned back to her, his blue eyes blazing. "I don't destroy what I care about." The words struck her harder than any weapon ever could. She bowed her head, shame flooding through her veins. "Oscar, why did you do it?" he demanded, stepping closer. "Tell me." Emma squeezed her eyes shut. "Because I didn't know I had a choice. I was trained to believe that survival meant loyalty to my people, no matter the cost. And now?" Oscar's voice softened, but his presence remained as commanding as ever. She looked up at him, tears welling in her dark eyes. "And now, I don't know anymore." Oscar stared at her, his gaze searching hers for something she couldn't name. Then, slowly, he reached out and cupped her face, his hands warm and strong. "Then decide," he said, his voice low. "Decide if you're still their weapon, or if you're something more." Emma's breath hitched, her pulse quickening under his touch. "I regret it," she whispered, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "I regret all of it. I thought I was doing what was right, but you weren't." Oscar finished for her. "And yet you're still here. You're still alive. That means you can start again." Emma stared into his eyes, searching for the anger she knew she deserved. But there was none. There was only fire, unyielding, unrelenting, and something else that made her heart pound. Desire. "Why do you care so much?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Oscar leaned closer, his breath brushing against her lips. "Because I see you, Emma, the real you, and I'm not letting you go." The tension between them snapped like a taut wire. Emma surged forward, her hands threading through his hair as his lips crashed against hers. The kiss was fierce, desperate, a battle as much as it was a surrender. Every unspoken word, every ounce of regret and passion ignited between them like wildfire. Oscar's arms wrapped around her, pulling her against him, as if he were afraid she might vanish. Emma melted into him, her body answering his with an intensity she couldn't control. They moved together, each touch sparking a fire that burned away everything else: her past, her mission, her lies. Oscar pulled back just enough to look at her, his breathing ragged. "This isn't just a moment, Emma," he said, his voice hoarse with emotion. "This is a choice, my choice, and yours." Emma stared at him, her heart hammering in her chest. For the first time, the answer was clear. "This is my choice," she whispered. Oscar claimed her lips again, and this time there was no hesitation. No doubt, only passion, raw and consuming, that pulled them deeper into each other. They were fire and storm, two forces clashing and merging into something extraordinary, something that would leave a mark neither of them could erase. And for the first time in her life, Emma didn't feel like a weapon. She felt free. The sun had begun its descent, casting streaks of gold and crimson across the horizon as Emma stood on the balcony overlooking Oscar's kingdom. Her fingers traced the rail absent-mindedly, her heart strangely still. Below, the city hummed with life, the utopia he had dreamed of. Behind her, Oscar leaned against the doorway, watching her silently. They had shared everything: truth, fire, and an intimacy that transcended both battle and betrayal. She felt him there, his presence grounding her, and for the first time, she didn't feel alone. "Strange," she murmured, not turning around. "What is?" Oscar's voice was calm, steady. "That this place, you, feels more like home than anywhere I've ever known." She looked back at him, her black eyes softened. "And I don't even deserve it." Oscar stepped toward her, his gaze unwavering. "You do, Emma. You just need to choose to fight for it." Before Emma could respond, a sharp, sudden beep broke the quiet, a sound that froze her blood. She turned sharply, her gaze dropping to the small Sarathi communicator embedded in her belt, long dormant since she betrayed her mission. The light was blinking. "No," she whispered, reaching for it with trembling hands. Oscar was at her side in an instant. "What is it?" Emma didn't answer. She activated the device, and a holographic projection flickered to life, a figure cloaked in darkness, its voice distorted but unmistakably Zarathi. "Agent E-741, the voice said, cold and unfeeling. "The data has been received. You've done your part." Emma's stomach twisted into knots. What do you mean?" The figure continued as if she hadn't spoken. "The kingdom of Eldrin will fall at sunrise. Our fleet is already en route." Oscar's expression darkened as he turned to her, realization dawning in his eyes. "What did you do?" "I didn't..." Emma's voice cracked, horror washing over her like a wave. She had sent the data. She had made this possible. Her people had never intended to negotiate, never intended to stop. The hologram flickered. "You will be extracted after the destruction is complete. Stand by." The device cut off, leaving a chilling silence in its wake. Emma staggered back, her mind spinning. No, this isn't what I wanted." Oscar's jaw tightened, the fire in his blue eyes now colder than ice. "But it's what you've done." The wind whipped around them, and Emma's chest heaved with guilt, with fear. She turned to Oscar, reaching for him. "Oscar, I can stop this. I can." He pulled back, his expression unreadable. "Can you?" The pain in his voice was worse than any punishment, worse than any hatred. Emma felt her knees weaken as she realized the truth. Her betrayal hadn't ended when she'd chosen him. It had only just begun, and now there was no way to take it back. Minutes later, the world was destroyed.